Hi everyone, welcome to History on Trial. This is Dr. Tracey McCarthy, psychologist, attorney, and educator, and we're going to be talking about a cultural group known as the Amalekites, also Amaleki, Amaleshi, depending on how it's spelled and how people are choosing to pronounce it. And so what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at the psychology of identity of this particular group. We're going to look at the present day cultural group of the Amalekites, the Amaleki. We're going to identify the location of this particular cultural group, a little bit about the history, and a little bit about the etymology of the word Amalekite or Amaleki or Amaleshi. And so we're also going to look a little bit at the ancient history and the relevance of that and some of the atypical dynamics related to this particular cultural group in contrast to other groups, other cultural groups that are similarly situated. And if this video appears on anything other than Dr. Tracey McCarthy, it is stolen and unauthorized. Let's get started. And so our discussion is going to start with a look at the annual report of the Department of Indian Affairs. And this report is over a century old. And in reviewing this report, this is the Canadian equivalent of the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And so in reviewing this report related to Canadian Indians, the population popped up known as the Amalekites, so the Amalekite Indians. And in this report, they are identifying a number of dynamics related to different Indian groups in Canada. And one of the things they note is that all of the Indians under the supervision of that particular district, for the most part, are of the Amalekite tribe. And here are additional notations indicating where the different bands are located in Canada. Now, there are a few interesting notations in this particular passage here. One is the notation that none of the children attend school. Another notation is that the children did not care to mix with white children. This sounds substantially similar to some of the dynamics going on with the Delaware Indians. And so you can read up on some of that with the creation of special schools for different groups of children. And it's not always clear how those lines of demarcation were created, but apparently they were. And also you note that it says these Indians are all Roman Catholics. Now, what's interesting about that is that with this identification of this name of this tribe, that there wouldn't be more discussion about this given the religious affiliation for this particular tribe. And at the top you can see a number of iterations of the name. There's also indication of what tribal stock they come from, and also information about where the settlements are. And you can stop the video and look at this. And you can also see some other names that they were known by. And here you see a notation that they were aligned with the French, and also there was another alliance they had with other Indian groups, and you can see that information. You can also see another spelling for this particular group with the M-A-L-I-S-E-E-T. Now we're going to do a review of some of the depictions of this particular tribal group. What's going to be interesting is the diversity in terms of the attire, and also the anomalous attire in terms of the relationship between the attire of this group and other groups of American Indians that you might be used to seeing. And so there is a substantial similarity in terms of clothing, in terms of attire, in terms of headdress even. And so there is a bit of a distinction with this particular group, and it's pretty noteworthy. And here is an additional depiction of this particular tribal group. And here you see additional depictions. There are a couple of things to make note of here. On the left-hand side, you see a headdress and an attire that doesn't really look substantially similar to what you might be used to seeing in terms of American Indians, whether you're talking about in Canada, whether you're talking about the United States, or whether you're talking about in the southern parts of the Americas. And also on the right-hand side, you might make note of the fact that the headdress really looks like a crown. It stands straight up in terms of the feathers. And so that is a common theme in terms of the headdress. There is some variation sometimes, but this is a common theme. Now, what's really atypical about this is if you look to the left, you see an individual from this particular tribal group. And then if you look to the right, you see an individual who's identified as Scythian. And so what you'll notice is that the headdress is the same. It's a very similar headdress between the two groups. And as we go on looking at the depictions, you will note that the attire, again, is inconsistent with what you normally or typically think of in terms of the attire of American Indians, or in Canada, those who are known as First Nations. Again, here you can see the similarity between the headdress of the woman on the right-hand side and the Scythian archer warrior in the middle, and then you see the headdress again sticking up in terms of the directions of the feathers. And you can see also the clothing that the woman is wearing. It looks substantially European or sort of Eurasian. And here you can see similar headgear, and this is for the Ottoman army uniforms. And here are additional depictions of this particular Indian group, and this is where you can really clearly see that the attire looks very different in relation to other Indian groups in the Americas. And again, this looks substantially European, and the headgear is definitely very similar to, if not exactly the same as, the Scythian warrior, the archer. And here you see additional depictions of this Native American Indian group known as the Amalekites or the Amaleki. And again, with the headdress and very European looking clothing, very Eastern European looking clothing. And here are additional depictions. And here are some additional depictions. And again, you see this repeated dynamic with the headgear. And here you can get a more close-up look at the headgear, the side view of it, and then you can see the Scythian archer. And here you see additional depictions of this particular Indian tribe. And you can see off to the left, the clothing looks very European. It's just very clear off to the left and to the right. Again, so it's pretty anomalous in terms of the relationship between this clothing, this attire, and the attire that you generally see, the traditional attire of American Indians. And also there's a notation about the names of the individuals, and so they are identified as belonging to the Amalekite tribe, but at the same time one individual also has a name that has an Arabic meaning to it, and so the names are not traditional American Indian names also. And here is another more ancient depiction of that headgear. Now, what's interesting here is you can see the different spellings of this particular Indian group. They are brought up in scripture a number of times, and you can see across time that there are different spellings. So you see the traditional spelling that you saw originally in the literature up top, and that was in 1750. 1394, it was just Amalek. And then 1531, you see Amalekites with the K. And then at the bottom, 1535, you see Amalekite or Amaleki or Amaleshi with the CHITE. And here you can see additional information related to the name of this particular tribe of people. Indicates a descendant of Esau. Also his posterity. You see that the name is related to Amal and also Amalek. And so you can see occurrences in scripture off to the right hand side. And here you can see it's not only the name of a person, but also the country for that particular group of people. And here you see the notation in terms of the phonetic spelling of this word. It looks like Amalekite, but the phonetic spelling is Amaleki. And here you see some additional notations related to the group and also occurrences off to the right. And here you see additional notations related to parts of that word. And so it's also related to this idea of to labor and to toil. Now this is a particularly interesting notation. As you recall, the Indian groups in Canada are known as First Nations. And so here you see in this discussion in the Jewish Encyclopedia, this identification of the Amalekites as the first of the nations. And there's also a notation that Amalek stands for Rome. And then there's also a notation that Edom, also known as Esau, also stands for Rome. And here you see some additional notations related to the relationships, these confederacies again. And then you also see an identification of the collective being identified as the children of the East, and also a relationship between the Amaleki and Agag. Now that Agag is supposed to be the name of the king of the Amaleki, the Amalekites. Interestingly, in this dictionary from 1873, Agag is identified as related to Angola. And here are some helpful transliterations in a few languages. You have Hindi and you have Arabic. And you can see that it's cut off in terms of Arabic. You have what looks like just Malik. And here you can see some worldwide incidents in terms of different variations of that name phonetically. So you can see phonetically these similarities, and you can see there are a few in Cameroon with that similarity. You also have most identified in Morocco, and that's the 1204. Okay, and we are wrapping this up. We have taken a look at a present-day cultural group, an American Indian cultural group known as the Amalekites. This name has an extensive and a very involved history, very ancient history, with roots that are east. It's unclear at what point in time this particular group arrived in the Americas. We have identified the location as Canada and looked a little bit at the etymology, a little bit about the ancient history and relevance, and also these atypical dynamics in terms of the attire. And the attire looking extremely modern in terms of ancient history and ancient times. So the attire looks a cross between very modern and ancient all at the same time. What's noted, however, is that the attire does not look like what you would typically expect when you look at American Indian attire. And there does seem to be a little bit of variety. So you do have some of the traditional attire that appears to be more in line with what you would see typically with American Indians, and then you see the attire that you have on the screen. And what this might mean is that you have this merging, and so you just may have a mixture going on. And so you might have the indigenous people intermarrying with this particular group from the East, and then merging and then creating a whole new identity. What's really fascinating, however, is that you have multiple American Indian groups with histories that appear to be a mixture of a sort of Eurasian history or African history mixed in with what would be considered American Indian history. And so with that amalgamation, it's sometimes difficult to disentangle exactly what's going on in terms of these historical narratives. And that wraps up this discussion on the Amalekite Indians. Remember, knowledge is power. Take care. See you soon.